A word of warning, this podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes some strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing. Hello and welcome to True Crime Daily, the podcast covering high-profile and under-the-radar cases from across the country every week. I'm your host, Ana Garcia. We're doing a special episode today on the horrific sexual crimes and the abuse against women and children in the Amish community. Because the Amish are so secretive and private, these crimes are rarely reported to police. And if they are reported, some police departments will let the Amish church leaders handle the justice themselves. Today, we will tell you the story of an Indiana mother who has been ostracized and shunned by her own family and friends for calling the police on her abusive husband. They blame her for the abuse, not him. This young mother stood strong, fought back, and got her abusive husband convicted and sent to prison. It is an unbelievable story. We are recording this on April 5th of 2023. This podcast is a follow-up to one of our most downloaded and viewed episodes ever. You may recall that 2.5 years ago, we uncovered a series of horrific sexual assaults against a 12-year-old girl in Missouri who was repeatedly attacked by her 4 brothers. She became pregnant and she gave birth at the age of 13. It was the doctor who called police. The 2 brothers, Petey and Aaron Schwartz, were charged, but about to walk away with no prison time as part of a sweet plea deal because the prosecutor actually said they had been punished enough by the Amish themselves. Are you kidding me? That podcast outraged all of you. It is our most downloaded and viewed episode ever, with nearly 2.5 million views on YouTube. So today, we're back with an update on what is really going on inside some Amish groups that will shock you. After that podcast, former homicide detective Louis Bolaños and I began our own investigation. We even traveled to Indiana and Ohio last summer in July of 2022 to meet with current and former Amish people trying to help and rescue victims. Many of you know Louis, who is a frequent contributor to this program. Louis is also a private investigator who runs Get Bit Investigations. He's a former homicide detective. He also volunteers much of his time as a victim advocate. Louis, welcome back. I am so excited to talk about this with you today.
Yeah, so am I. Thank you so much for having me again, Anna. This case is so personal to me now, and to you. I'm so happy we're getting to update our audience on this. It's been an amazing, as you said, 2.5 years. Hard to believe, but I can't believe how close I came to not being part of that episode, and I'm so glad I was, because it truly changed my life, as I know it did yours.
It really has. We've started on, it's almost like a crusade. After that podcast was released, the amount of calls for help were overwhelming. Many of them went to you. You ended up setting up a hotline. We ended up doing some advocacy work for some of the survivors who were really challenged within a legal system which is foreign to them. You know, they live a very simple life, the Amish. And it's taken several years, but because of this, Louis, we've built an incredible level of trust with some key people in this community who are running safe houses, who are running operations to get women and children out of dangerous situations. Amazing police and prosecutors who get it and understand the difficulty of working within such a secretive community. But the kinds of crimes we uncovered, Louis, are horrific. I mean, we're talking about abusive women, abusive children, boys. We're talking also about drug abuse. We're talking about these unaccredited mental, behavioral facilities which are run by different church groups, and survivors or victims are sent there to be reprogrammed because they're the problem as opposed to dealing with the abuser. This is insanity.
Yeah, these places actually exist, and really the mental adjustment centers, right? And the adjustment is toward and focused on the victim of the crime, whether it's a woman or a child, to get them to see the way of the church. And I'm careful calling this a church, but that's the banner they're flying under right now. That's a whole other issue. We'll dig into that in a little bit.
Yeah, and we do want to be clear. Look, there are beautiful, wonderful Amish churches and communities, and it is a peace-loving group, very respectful for the most part, without question. But then there are these groups within there that are, I talk about it this way. You want to live like it's the 16 and 1700s, right? Well, that also means that the attitude toward your rights as a human being, as a woman or a child, means that's how you're being treated. And that's the problem. That's the disconnect.
Absolutely. Based on that last podcast we did over 2.5 years ago, I have probably received over 200 calls on the hotline that we put out. And one of the common threads I saw and heard from these folks that were still within the Amish community and those that had escaped, that's their common term, escaped, was that these communities that they were associated with prioritized man first, horse second, woman, child third. That's their belief. And I hear that from different factions of Amish communities throughout the country. What year is this? Well, it's 2023, and this is still going on.
It's incredible. It is shocking. I think the time we've had, and for us to be there, to physically be in these Amish communities in Indiana and Ohio, even though we've been talking to people from all over the country, really helped us to understand everything in real time. They really do travel in buggies. Their limited communication with people. It was a very interesting time for us. It was very eye-opening. We want to continue on this path of shedding a light on this because we believe that change is possible. Justice is important. We must have not several justice systems. There's a justice system for one. You cannot decide that you will take justice into your own hands. And there has to be a better way. And because of these, some really aggressive prosecutors, we're seeing some changes. The case we're going to talk about that mom in Indiana, Elizabeth Hilty, who Lewis and I got to know very well. What's important there is what a maverick she was to take on this case and file charges. And she was supported by the prosecutors and the police. Other women have not had that level of support. So when you hear her story, she's going to take us through with great frankness. And, we've been to her house. She's a lovely, lovely woman and such a strong woman. So we're going to talk about that case. We're going to talk to her first. And then afterwards, Lewis and I are going to have a conversation about a case that we've been watching out of Indiana. And it's a really powerful one because it shows the power of Amish churches and bishops. It's a case of intimidation. A maverick prosecutor in Elkhart County charged 3 Amish bishops with intimidation because they went to this woman's house, a mother and a wife. She got a restraining order against her abusive husband, abusing her and her children. These bishops threatened her, told her to drop the restraining order. This is all came out in court. They've been convicted. And according to what happened in court, they said, yes, we told her. We asked her to drop the restraining order, bring her husband back into the house because this marriage must be saved. It is God's will. And it's shocking. Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
It's amazing. Thank goodness for this maverick prosecutor, as you call her. She's doing something that has never been done before. But we have seen this before where church leaders in the Amish communities will come in and dictate as best they can how our criminal justice system should treat their cases. And sometimes you don't have mavericks like this
right.
spearheading the justice system. You have people that will tell you, and they've told me specifically, or I call them and talk to them about specific cases. This is the Amish community. This is how we have always handled it. This is the way it will always be. And I just shake my head. As long as you're in charge, you're right. That's the way this is going to remain.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to spotlight that as well. So let's get to our first guest, Elizabeth Hilty, who's an amazing human being. So we met her in Indiana. We'd been talking to her for a year and finally met her last summer. Elizabeth Hilty is a mother of 7, all boys. A beautiful family. And she is really brave because after years of abuse, she finally called the police and had her husband, Willis Hilty, arrested. She was 8.5 months pregnant when he sexually assaulted her. She didn't even have a phone to call the police. She had to walk across to a neighbor's house to get a phone, call for help. And that call changed her life, saved her life, saved her boys' lives without question. He was prosecuted, convicted, went to prison, is now a registered sex offender. But you're going to hear Elizabeth's story. We're going to bring her on now. Elizabeth, it is so good to see you again. How are you?
I'm good. I've never been better.
Oh my gosh. I can see it in your face, Elizabeth. I can see it in your face. You have so much light in your eyes and your face. When we saw you, you had just left the Amish community, maybe something like 3 weeks.
Not very long.
No, it was just an incredible time in your life. There were so many changes. Elizabeth, you've been very, very frank about your story, and it has cost you dearly in many ways. Relationships, a very difficult time with your parents. Let's just kind of start at the beginning. When you first met your husband, Willis Hilty, I believe that was around something like June of 2007. Did you meet at a church group, or how did you meet?
No, that's when we got married. We met 4 years prior to that, and we met at the youth group, our youth gatherings that we had. And he was very charming. I never expected him to be abusive. I didn't know that existed. My dad was not perfect, but he was a great man, treated my mother with respect. Him and my mom loved each other. They treated each other with respect as well. And I grew up in a great home. So that was something foreign to me in having abuse. I didn't know. I heard stories, but I'd never personally experienced it or known that it truly existed like that.
Yeah, I find that so fascinating because we said at the beginning here, we want to be clear. We're not painting a broad brush here of the Amish community, because your experience has been a beautiful experience growing up Amish in a truly loving family. And that's all you've ever known is love and safety. And so to then marry a man who you say then became a monster. Now, did Willis come from a prominent family? Was this a marriage? Like, were you in love with him? Was it arranged? Was he a good catch, in the world of the Amish?
It wasn't arranged. It was just a good catch. I mean, I had no idea that he was what he was, that he was a narcissist and antisocial personality person. Because he was diagnosed with both of those personality disorders. So, like, when we were dating, he treated me with all kinds of gifts, and he treated me like a queen. Up until right before we got married, he told me one time that he can be very bullheaded, stubborn. And I just kind of shrugged it off until after I was married. A couple years, I started finding out these things. And I was like, why did I not know? Well, I didn't know. I wasn't educated. I had no idea what kind of things actually happened. And my dad was very protective of us, of me and my siblings. He wouldn't let us go to certain places for the night or be there without him and my mom because of not trusting some people. And he said he doesn't want anything bad happening to us, was his way of saying that he didn't want us sexually abused. So my dad and mom were very protective of us as well. So I didn't know, I grew up in a sheltered home of not knowing what all actually happened in other homes. And here I had friends that were experiencing abuse and being molested by their own father or brothers. And I had no idea. And I get married and I seen right away what I married into, that he was just a monster. And, I clung to the hope that someday he'll change. And I blamed myself and thought if I would just be a better person or a better wife and mother. And it didn't help that the ministers, the bishop, they would come over and tell me the exact same thing, that if you would just maybe do this and this, be a better wife, listen to him, let him be the head of the home instead of running out in front of him and trying to do the man's job. Which in turn, I was just trying to protect my kids.
We want to be very respectful of everything that's happened here, but can you just give us an idea of the level of abuse?
Yes. He was very abusive sexually, physically, pretty much in every way that you can think of. He was abusive, financially, emotionally, verbally. But probably the worst was the sexual abuse that I experienced, where he would force sex on me, which I didn't know at the time that the word rape consisted within a marriage. The first time I heard that is when I explained to the sergeant what happened to me when he came to pick me and my boys up in 2017. And he told me, he said, "Do you know what you just described to me?" And I told him, "Well, no." And he said, "It's called rape." And that just hit a light bulb in me. And I was like, really? I have been having this all my marriage. When I was pregnant with my oldest son, my water broke, but the labor didn't go on. It was false labor. So the midwife sent me home, and she told me to just keep myself really clean and sanitized so I don't get infection. And with that came no sex as well. And obviously I didn't feel good either, but that didn't mean anything to Willis. He still had to have it.
I'm so sorry, Elizabeth.
And after a baby was born, I always knew that his first goal was to get me pregnant again. And I used to not understand that. But as time went by, and in looking back, I think it came from him knowing that I didn't feel good. I didn't have the strength to defend myself. He could literally manipulate me however he wanted to. And I would just give up. Until one day I had enough. And so I went and got the dictionary, and I read the definition of rape to him, which said any forceful action, sexual action taken against a female, which it shouldn't just say female, it should also say male, because it can be done to males as well. But through that, he got really mad and irate, and he started slapping me and shoving me around. And this was in front of my four-year-old and 5-year-old son, my two oldest at the time. And he ended up throwing a sad iron, had me pinned in a corner, and had his hand over my mouth. And I could have bit him, and I was ready to. And I heard, and I say it was God, tell me, "Don't do it. You'll only make it escalate." And I didn't. I don't remember how I got away, but he didn't stop there. He started kicking me from behind, and then ended up slamming me into the wall, which left an indentation in the drywall where my head hit. And after that, I forever had bad headaches. And to this day, I still deal with neck issues and headaches that come from that. But after that, he was shunned by the church for what he did. And at that point, the ministers didn't shun me. They told me, "I know what happened." But the bishop was his uncle. His dad, the bishop's wife was his dad's sister. So through that, there was family involved, and they, of course, sided in with each other. But after that, I started doing my own research on, what is happening? Why does these things keep happening? Because it was like every year, one episode would just be worse than the year before. And then I would get the newspaper, the Burn Tri-Weekly, through the mail, and they would have articles printed in there about domestic violence. And that's where I started educating myself on. It was through papers and stuff that came through the mail. That's pretty much all I could get my hands on. And then God sent some kind people, Amish people, Dave and Lena Chupp from Topeka, Indiana, into my life. And that changed it forever. They connected me with Rose Miller.
Oh, she's great.
From LaGrange, Indiana. And I talked with her for 2 years before I ever left. But I had an awesome neighbor lady. She would let me come over and use the phone if I needed to. And sometimes I would be there for an hour, just talking to Rose and trying to get through all of this.
So just for people who are following along with your case here, so Rose Miller at the time was the executive director of a local domestic violence center in your area. And
yes.
Yeah, and Rose was your lifeline that made it possible to give you the courage, the support, and the system for you to leave when you needed to. But imagine how, women outside of the Amish community at least have a basic understanding, right? Most of us can find the resources. But for you, it was a totally different challenge to find someone who could not only support you, but understand the nuances of the culture that you come from and be respectful to your needs and how you need to also live and exit.
And I remember telling Rose, she kept asking me, how long I'm going to stay, and take this. And I remember telling her, well, if I report anything or leave, somebody's going to get it. And meaning, some form of punishment or retaliation is going to happen from the Amish church to someone. And she would tell me, you've got to change that thinking. Because if you look at it like that, you're never going to step out for help. But she would never tell me what I should be doing. She would give me advice, and what I could do and couldn't. But I finally went through Rest Haven in Goshen, Indiana at Oak Lawn. And through there, they helped me out a lot. I was diagnosed with severe major depressive disorder, PTSD, and high anxiety. And I remember the doctor asking me, now, what are you going to do about this? And I looked at him and I said, well, I'm not playing the blame game. I'm going to recover from all of this. And he said, great, because if you play the blame game, you'll stay where you are and you'll never get better. You're going to blame Willis for this. He said, which in turn, it is his fault that you are where you are, but don't just leave it there. Take responsibility for the depression, the PTSD, seek out help and build yourself up, build your backbone. And that's exactly what I did. And not even a year later, I left. I called the police.
Tell us about that, Elizabeth. So tell us about that, Elizabeth, because that's such a pivotal moment. This was the last time he ever laid a hand on you.
Yes, it was.
You went to your neighbors.
It was on a Saturday. He wanted sex. And keeping this in mind, I was 8.5 months pregnant. I didn't feel good. So during the night, at some point I went into my boys' bedroom. We had 2 bedrooms, a 2-bedroom home. And I moved all of them into the full-size bed, and I slept in the half bed. And in the morning, he came into the bedroom, never closed the door. The boys weren't in there anymore, but they were playing in the living room. And he never closed the door. And I told him that I don't feel good. And he forced himself on me on a half bed. I was between him and the wall. And after he was done, I could hardly walk for the rest of the day. I just hurt. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I had talked to Adams Wells Crisis Center, the women's shelter, prior to that, and had told them, about my situation at some point, that I might all of a sudden call and need to come in. So next day was Sunday. We went to church, and I started gathering my things together and making preparations to call. And I called Adams Wells Crisis Center, and they told me they would call the police. And they didn't. They said that the police need to hear from me personally in order to come out and pick me up. So I was like, you guys are really putting me in a bind, because I had so hoped like they would do it so I can tell the Amish church. Well, I didn't call the police. It was just a roundabout way that I thought I could get around it.
Because, Elizabeth, help us understand the fear here and the repercussions and the pressure you were under, why that pressure was keeping you from making the call to police.
Because I knew I would be shunned. I would be shunned from my family, from everything. So that was a real fear, because in the Amish, the shunning is considered as cutting you off from God, which I know better now. But at the time, I was still under that huge fear of I didn't know all of that. But I ended up the next morning, on Wednesday morning, calling the police after Willis left for work. And the sergeant told me to stay where I am until he gets there and not go back home. And I told him, well, he is not home at all. He is at work, and I will go back home and I will be okay. So him and another officer came out, and I don't know why I was thinking that he would come back later to pick me up and give me a time. But after he had me in his car and I gave him a report on why I wanted to leave, then he told me, he said, we're not leaving without you. It's too dangerous. So I gathered up just the bare necessities for me and my boys. And I had 6 at the time because I was 8.5 months pregnant. And we had 2 police officers, sergeant and another one of his guys, that took us into sheriff cars to the women's shelter. Then the sergeant took me to talk to the detective. And they did a recording on me and why I left or wanted help in getting away. Then later on that day, they took me to the sexual assault center in Fort Wayne, where they did DNA testing. And I was very hesitant to do that because I was pregnant. And I asked him, what's the purpose of this? And the detective told me, it's so there's proof in front of the judge. It's not just your word against Willis's word. He said, if you do DNA testing, these people are trained for this kind of work. They will be very gentle with you and not do some things they normally would because of you being pregnant. He said, but they can detect things that normal people never will detect.
It's Lewis. It's like it's a special examination that shows if there was force, struggle, bruising, tearing.
Right. Or any forensic evidence left of any kind, whether it's semen or clothing. There's so many traces, things to be left behind. But I keep, Elizabeth, you're amazing. You are a superwoman, superhuman, super mom. Every time you had a question about anything, you never waited. You went and educated yourself. Something as obvious as, why are we doing this sex rape kit on me? What, is that potential harm to my child? What's the positive? What's the negatives with it? And you educated yourself. And I think now, today, if I ask you, you probably are glad you did that, because the results are one of the things that pushed this case in the direction it should have gone.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So no, I get it. And when you say shunning, I just can't stress enough, Ana, everybody we've interviewed in the last 2 years, over 200 individuals, right? To me, when I first heard about what shunning was 2.5 years ago on Daisy's case, right, I didn't give it the merit it deserved. And now when you hear an Amish individual is trying to escape the Amish community, and the fear of shunning is all of a sudden in their purview, that's the worst possible thing that can happen to somebody who's in the Amish community or trying to leave. They're going to be not only disconnected from God for the rest of their life, but their families are going to be, everything they care about, it's going to be put in a corner. And some will even tell you that they're going to hell if they leave. If you're shunned, your entire family, or if you go to law enforcement, will go to hell forever. And they believe that because they're just not, they haven't been educated in that direction yet. They only know what they've been told within some of these Amish communities. And Elizabeth, you went on, you educated yourself, right? Ordering newspapers. You didn't have internet. You did what you needed to do so that you could give yourself strong, viable, accurate information. And you build up a war chest. You had incredible ammunition. And I think not just to protect yourself, but your 7 boys, right? They're never going to forget what you did. Yeah, that's just amazing. But yeah.
And so strong, especially, I think, again, people don't realize it's horrible to be in crisis and to be a victim. And then, but, people outside of the Amish community may not have to lose everything that you need to lose, meaning you would lose everything, your family, your community, every possible support. No one would stand by you. Your parents did, but even that cost you. I know it's been a rough go. So once you had the examination, the forensic examination that showed that you had clearly been physically assaulted, sexually assaulted, you told your story to police. Then was Willis arrested? What happened next?
Yes, he was. My baby was actually born 2 weeks, not quite 2 weeks after I left. And at that time I was living in LaGrange County because an Amish couple from Topeka, Indiana came down to Adams County at the women's shelter and brought me and my boys to their house, and we lived there with them for two and a half months. And the day that my baby was born is the day Willis was arrested. And he was arrested. I did a personal protective order as well. And two weeks later, after my baby was 2 weeks old when we had that first hearing, and I still remember how scared I was. And knowing, I didn't have an attorney. I didn't know that I would be allowed to have one because the Amish were very much against getting attorneys. So I went to court with only a victim advocate and the guy that Dave Chubb, he's an awesome Amish guy, that he went with me. And then the prosecutor of Adams County, Jeremy Brown, he didn't have to be in court with me. Absolutely not, because he was with the criminal case. And this was my personal own protective order that I had filed. But he sat there in court with me, and he even intervened for me a couple times and asked the judge if I could go to my house and get more clothes and food and stuff. my canned goods, and different belongings. So the judge made a time window that I could go and get it. So yes, I had an awesome experience with law enforcement, with the court system in Adams County that not everybody has. And I am very thankful for it.
Once Willis was arrested, help us to understand over the next, few weeks, few months, what was happening with your family, his family? Even though there was a protective order, was Willis trying to talk to you? Were his parents and your parents or anyone intervening or pressuring you to drop everything?
Yes, the Amish people absolutely wanted me to drop everything. And the Amish people went and sent Willis out to Pennsylvania at Whispering Hope.
So let's explain here. But Whispering Hope, my understanding is this is a facility that Willis went to for what purposes? Run by whom?
It's run by the Amish and Old Order Mennonites out in Pennsylvania, and they are not licensed at all. No licensed counselors there. The purpose was for him to get help so that he would recover from his abusive behavior. But the real purpose behind it was so that they could tell the judge, that they will put him through so-and-so program and make sure that he gets punished or gets help for his abusive behaviors. They will hold him accountable so that the judge will let him off the hook.
Elizabeth, while your husband, Willis, has now been charged and is at one of these facilities run by Mennonites and Amish that's, supposedly to rehabilitate him and help him. Clearly, the man does need help. I mean, no one is questioning that. But if you're not in the hands of true professionals and the whole purpose is, to subvert the system, that's where I get very upset with that. So while he's there working on himself in the Amish way, whatever that means, are you being pressured by anyone to take him back and again drop this? Because I think this is the crux of the problem here, right, Lewis?
Yes, absolutely. Their goal here is to use this unaccredited, unlicensed mental facility to not just reprogram, if it even includes Willis or suspects, but Elizabeth's mindset, right? To get her to drop that restraining order before they can accept her back, and combine that with the threat of possibly being shunned. And I don't know about this specific facility that Elizabeth was exposed to, but I know that we have discovered many, many other facilities just like this, where they're not accredited, they're practicing medicine and distributing medication, unlicensed, from people that have just been tapped on the shoulder by some of these Amish commuters that help us push our beliefs on the people we send your way. It's just something that it's happening right now as we speak in 2023. It deserves a lot more attention.
Did they try to get you to go to one of these places, Elizabeth?
Oh yeah, they did. Back when I was still, before I ever left, between the time of me after being at Rest Haven and before I called the police. In that time, one night the ministers came over because of some things that had happened, and I had a friend that called the police. So I was punished in church because the police came out. And anyway, the next night the bishop and one of the ministers show up. And they tell me that they're going to, if things don't start getting better, they're going to send us both away. And I told them, I said, I'm not leaving my kids again. I was gone for 7 weeks and I promised my kids I would never leave them like that again. Said, and I'm not going. And I asked them where they're planning on sending us. And they said that we will tell you once, we decide. And they said, but we've had dealings with this place before, and it's a good place. And in telling me that, they might as well have told me that where it was, because I knew the lady that they tried to get to go there before. And it was out in Whispering Hope in Pennsylvania. So I told them, I said, you guys, he can go. I said, Willis can go. You can send him, but I'm not going. And they told me, the bishop told me that if we vote with the church and everyone is agreed, you are going. And I looked at him and I said, Reuben, I said, if I say I am not going, I'm not going. And I said, I'm not leaving my kids. And he said, we'll take care of your kids. He said, people will take turns in taking care of them. And I told him, no, you're not getting my kids.
Who are these people? Who are these people to try and commit you to a facility that we believe is unlicensed, unaccredited? Who are these people to try and institutionalize another human being outside of the legal system? Who are these people? You can't do this.
No, you can't do. I have to ask, Elizabeth, when you said they punished you in church, what is this during an actual service? They called you out in front of the congregation?
They came over couple nights before church, the Sunday we had church. And they wanted me to do a confession about, I don't know. I know the Amish way of saying it is so different from how the real world says it, but it was in fighting with my husband. So they wanted me to do a confession on that, and then because the police had been there. And I literally argued with them and told them that I'm not doing it. And then finally, that's where I came to realize, I will never, ever change these people. And it'll always be a brick wall coming up against them. You know what? I'll go do a confession, but from here on out, and I know this was in September of 2016, but from here on out, I'm making preparations to leave. And I did. But I had to get down on my knees and say that I am sorry for what I did, and I will try to do better in front of every member of the church that was there that day.
So wrong.
Yeah, so wrong. So many levels.
But that part there is when the bishop told me, Reuben Swartz was the bishop from Adams County, when he told me that they will take my kids, and I looked at him and I said, you won't get my kids. Said, there's no way. And he told me, he said, don't you know who I am? I have the power and authority to make you go. And if you don't listen, I will punish you. And I told him, I don't care. You can punish me. I'm not going.
We have seen that threat before in other Amish communities, where the Amish church tries to create separation between a parent or parents from the children with the threat of go do what you got to do, keep the kids here. And once that happens, it's almost impossible to get your children back. I'm so glad you stayed strong and kept your kids with you. Was that something that ever crossed your mind, that if you separated from those kids, that it might be permanent?
I knew, when I was at Rest Haven, they, when I left to go there, we had agreed, Willis and I had agreed that they would stay at my parents', and he could go there, spend time with there, spend nights there, whatever, but that is where they would stay. Well, once I was at Rest Haven, a couple days later, him and his dad, Willis and his dad, came to my parents' house and took the kids, and then they took them back and forth however they wanted to. And it really messed them up. When I came home, my oldest son was in first grade. So he was 7 at the time. And he cried and he said, "Mom, please never leave us like that again." And I knew they would brainwash them if I ever left again like that. They would brainwash my kids that I am a mean, evil mother and woman.
Horrific what you've been through. Elizabeth, so, take us through the process of, did Willis actually end up taking a plea deal? Was he convicted? What ended up happening with Willis's case against you? We want to be clear about the charges. He was arrested on January 23rd. He was charged with sexual assault at a level 3 felony in Indiana. He ended up, was there a trial or did he just plead guilty? Was there a deal?
He pled guilty. Did a 10-year plea agreement. And prior to that, I have never been aware of this, but the Amish people say that he was offered a 3-year plea agreement. And the prosecutor never, ever made me aware of anything like that. I know that at the beginning he had talked about a 13-year plea agreement, and Willis had declined it.
So the agreement was, what the actual sentence was 10 years in prison, 2 years suspended, and he was scheduled to serve 8 years. How long did he actually serve?
Well, then he went in and he automatically gets another 2 years knocked off. And then he enrolls into programs, does his GED, and he actually only served a little over 4 years. He was sentenced and arrested in June of 2017. In August of 2021, he was released on home detention. He had his sentence modified.
Home detention. And then he was required to register as a sex offender. And Louis, you looked at his registry.
I did. Yeah, he's registered for life, apparently. And he's registered as a violent predator.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. And, it's not too uncommon that at some point and I know this is because you're preparing yourself, you're educating yourself, Elizabeth, he may try to seek some type of visitation rights, whether it's supervised as I'm with the children. And that's something that you're going to educate yourself about. I'm absolutely sure as to what your rights are and how to deal with that when that happens. But right now he is a registered offender, and I believe he has to stay away not just from you but all of your boys. Right? There's a court order in place for that.
Is there a court order now?
The judge actually went and put in a no contact order with his sentencing that day because the courtroom was packed with Amish people, and they were all there in support of him.
In support of the man who has just pleaded guilty to a violent sexual offense. Tell me this is not screwed up.
Right. Yeah. And look, have we seen that before, Anna? Right. And I'm sure Elizabeth has, where the Amish pack the courtrooms with the Amish to support the suspect, and not just to support the suspect, but what else does that do? It puts even more intimidation on the victim. Part of the shunning. The whole town won't even. You come to those doors, they won't even look at you in your eyes. They will completely turn their heads. Right? It's just it's a community effort when these things happen. We'll talk about that more in a bit.
And the one thing I want to point out with talking about the no contact, we do actually next week have a court hearing coming up where Willis asked to have the no contact order modified on my family, because at this point he's not allowed to even talk to my mom and dad and my siblings. I didn't know that had been included until about a year ago, that he's not allowed to talk to them or see them. So he's asking to have that modified, and also on the boys, my 7 sons, have the no contact order modified where he can start out with supervised visitation. And then he wants his probation terms and sex offender status modified. He has,
Of course he does. Yeah.
he has a 6-page safety plan written up, probably with the help of his 3 attorneys, and has 6 people on there, his mom and dad, his brother and his wife, and Eli Shetler and John Shetler, his 2 guys that are power of attorneys for him, that those 6 would be his accountability team. And when the prosecutor called me, or the victim advocate from the prosecutor's office called me about this about 2 months ago, and I told her my first problem with it is the accountability team. They will never hold him accountable, ever.
Right. It's a sham.
And the other thing is, he's asking for a sex offender modification because he's Amish and he thinks he deserves it because he's following all the rules. And I told her, I said, in another year, if you modify all of this in another year, or even before that, he has a pattern of this where he wants to come back and ask for another modification of something else. And I told her, he's going to keep this up. If you guys keep giving in, he's going to keep it up until he has everything removed.
What is the status of your marriage? Are you divorced?
The divorce is pending. It's not finalized yet because of this court hearing coming up. See, in the divorce, we don't have any custody issues at all because of the state's no contact. So he can't bring any custody things. It's automatically, that is resolved.
Oh, and Elizabeth, didn't you tell us that after Willis got out of prison, even though there was the restraining order and the no contact order, that you were being pressured to take him back? Who pressured you to take this man back?
The Amish church. The Amish people.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing, that right before I left the Amish, almost a little over a year ago, there were Amish people that wanted to go see him. And they said, if he has good things to say about you, we will come back and tell you. And I told them, I said, you can't do that. There's a no contact order. You can't. And they were like, well, who would find, like, how would the judge ever know? How would these people ever find out that we did that? Who's going to tell them? That is how much respect they have for law enforcement, and think how much above the law they are.
Unbelievable.
Elizabeth,
Now, I'm sorry, please.
I'm sorry. Elizabeth, who paid for his 3 attorneys?
His dad and the church.
And did you get any help?
No. Yeah, well, from the Amish, while I was still Amish, they had a benefit fund set up for me. But with that came a form of control as well. This is our money, and we want to know where it all goes.
Yeah.
Right. To keep you Amish, because they didn't want you to leave. They didn't want you to continue, with the legal battle and the criminal case. Yeah, it was all a coordinated effort to pressure and manipulate you. This is insanity. You are the victim of a violent sexual assault, and somehow it is all your fault, and everybody rallies around the man who attacked you. This is beyond me. It is beyond me.
And I'm only one of the very, very many women living like that. I'm only one voice. I'm only one of the many, many women that stepped out. The others are still there and trying to fight their way through, and some are shut down so much they just go along and ride along. They just take the abuse.
Yeah. You're a special person, right? People are watching what you're doing, Elizabeth. That I'm sure you're going to get positive feedback. Someone saw the path you generated, you took, and they're following your footsteps because you're going to make it easier for the next person. And that's probably already happened. That's the goal.
That's what I hope that happens.
Yeah.
I do. I honestly hope it does.
Elizabeth, how has this affected your relationship with your family? Have your parents been shunned as well?
They were harassed very much. I call it harassment. My parents don't like it when I call it that, but I do because that's what it is. They were harassed to the point where they sold their place back in 2017 and moved out of the community. But then a couple months later, they moved back to the Adams County community.
They moved back into the community?
Yes, just in a different church district.
So I think, Elizabeth, I want to make sure that we share with everyone not just this horrific part of your journey, but also there have been many blessings along the way and an incredible level of growth for you. Because, Amish women are not educated because the Amish don't believe in educating their girls in particular. And so not only did you educate yourself, think about it. You didn't even have a phone to call the police. You had to go to a neighbor's house. Your life has changed so dramatically. Like in the last year, not only did you leave the Amish, you got your GED. You learned to drive. Louis and I were there the day that your minivan was delivered to your house, your very first vehicle ever. I took the video of it. We're going to show it because I just couldn't believe it. And you're standing there holding the keys. So joyful, such a great moment for you. So what's this, Elizabeth?
This is my first car ever, my first minivan. And I just bought it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Wow.
And the thing is, I cashed off my first vehicle that I bought. Like it was paid for. I didn't have car payments.
Well done.
And I don't have that one anymore. I now just last week bought a 2018 Yukon. And to me, it's almost a dream because that's the kind of vehicle I always wanted, and I never thought I would be able to actually afford one. And I bought my own place, which I had bought my own place back in 2020. And I sold that one in September and bought another 3-acre with a house and attached garage. And I moved, and now I get this vehicle and I apply for a loan, and the loan goes through without any problems. I don't need a cosigner, and I'm just on cloud 9 because I'm like, I never thought I would be able to actually do it.
Yeah, wow. That's amazing. Congratulations. A lot of folks can do it. You got it done.
It's incredible. It's just like, to see your growth for us has just been such a joy for you to share this with us because we've seen it, to go from, living a life where I think in your last home, do you have electricity now? Your last home, you had a generator when we visited?
I did not have electricity. I only had a generator.
Do you have electricity now?
Yes, I do. And I love it.
Yeah, comes in handy.
You have Wi-Fi, you have a phone, you have computers.
I have a TV.
Oh, nice.
It's amazing. I mean, my God, so much. I am so humbled that you have shared your story with us and that you have let us in. You are such an inspiration to have done all of this in the face of adversity, and you still smile and you have light within you.
Yes.
I know that probably many people that will watch this, they might not be believers in Jesus, but I always say Jesus is the reason for my smile, for my joy. I would not be where I am if it wouldn't be for God. He never once let me down. Every time when I thought I was to the end where I didn't have any way to turn, I call those the Red Sea moments, because God parted the waters for me, just like he did for the Israelites when they came to the Red Sea and thought they had to go back.
Just such an inspiration. Honestly, and you were so kind to open your home to us, and we had some time with your family, your beautiful boys. My gosh, I just think you are just one of the strongest women I've ever met.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just, Elizabeth.
I have some awesome kids, though.
You do.
You do.
You do. They're beautiful. Your boys are beautiful, beautiful, beautiful young men. And, and just, again, it's so hard for me to see like where you were and where you are now. Again, when we met you were getting around by a horse and buggy, and there's no way you could fit 7 children in that. Lewis and I were in the back of the buggy with you.
We went for a ride, right? That was truly an experience.
Yes, you did.
Yes, we did.
And I'm like, how do you get 7 children in here, get the groceries and do everything? Your life has changed so dramatically. I do have a question, though, about Amish. So you're not Amish anymore. But are there parts of you within you and in your heart because of how you grew up and your family and your friends? I mean, is there a part of you that is still Amish and that you either miss or you honor?
Absolutely. I always say I'll forever be grateful in growing up Amish. I love the lifestyle. Like, that's the part I miss, is the lifestyle we had with getting together with family and being there for each other, helping each other out. And the plain evenings we had together, like in growing up, my siblings and I and my mom, my dad was totally not a singer. He would sit there and listen. But during the summertime, we would sit on our front porch, and we had a huge front porch. And we would sit there and we would sing together as a family. And Dad would tell us that we're worse than a radio, because a radio you can turn off, but you can't turn you guys off. That, and just the whole thing. I love like our Amish church meals. There were the horses. If I could afford it, I would still have my horses. They were more like my pets than my way of transportation. I just loved like the way I grew up, everything about it. The community, how we came together to help each other. And if there's a funeral or a wedding, like, you didn't worry about how you were going to get done or how things are going to be taken care of. People just stepped up and did it. They came together and helped each other out. And I tell my boys, like, I had to work a whole lot harder than they have to now, like when I grew up. But then my older boys, they do remember that life, because they are old enough that they lived that. And I tell them they're spoiled now, and they tell me, no, Mom, we are not. We're just thankful for what we have now. And, that gave me a different perspective of it as well, because I never thought of it like that. I was just like, you guys are so spoiled, and not having to do laundry the way I used to always have to do it. It's a whole lot harder, but to me, I always had such joy. I love doing laundry that way. That I didn't have a washer and dryer. Actually, when I grew up, where we grew up, we had one of the rub-a-dub-dubs where we had to do it by hand.
Oh my God, Elizabeth, the life that you have lived is unbelievable and such an inspiration. And, Lewis and I are blessed to know you and our continued relationships.
It's a blessing to know you guys as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're very touched by that. We really are. Elizabeth, thank you for sharing your story. We wish you the best. And as always, I love that we text.
I do too.
I do too. All right, Elizabeth, best to you, your family, your boys. Much safety in your life.
Thank you.
So, Anna, part of what really just comes to the top when I ever hear Elizabeth speak about her story, she's so honest. You're just rooting for her and her amazing 7 kids. But we hear those stories over and over and over again. A lot of what she said has resonated with us because of other cases we have personally looked into. So part of that, just like Elizabeth, I tried to educate myself on Amish communities and what drives their beliefs and why law enforcement chooses not to get involved or only get involved in a certain way, minimal at best sometimes. And I had to ask myself, because people kept saying, well, they sound like a cult. They sound like a cult. They sound like a cult. Now, I want to be very careful with that, right? I'm not saying the community that Elizabeth is in is a cult, but I see consistencies with other Amish communities throughout the country. And just as of 2022, and there's 32 states that have Amish communities, there's about 400,000 Amish in the U.S., just in the U.S. So to have so many consistencies between each parish, each different community, it's very telling. But one of the common threads I see there, I'm going to read this to you, because what I did, I went out and I contacted 6 of the most world-renowned international cult experts, and I ran some things by them, and I read a lot of what they wrote. What I want to read to you is something from Steve Eichel. He's a world-renowned international cult expert and psychologist, and he's president of the International Cultic Studies Association. He gave me 6 points, things that you need to identify first, and then after these, if you answer these yes, you might be in a cult. Things to consider. So I'm going to read this to you. Number 1 says, beware of any kind of pressure that's probably the single most important advice he can give anyone. Any kind of pressure to make quick decisions about becoming involved in any intense kind of activity or organization. Amish, check. Number 2, be wary of any leader who proclaims him or herself as having special powers or special insight. And of course, divinity. Divinity defined as being or having divine attributes ranking below God, but above humans. Check. Number 3, the group is closed. So in other words, although there may be outside followers, there's usually an inner circle that follows the leader without question, and that maintains a tremendous amount of secrecy. Check. Number 4, the group uses deceptive means, typically to recruit new members, and then once recruited, will subject its members to an organized program of thought reform, or what people refer to as brainwashing. Check. Number 5, typically cults also exploit their members, mostly financially. Within the group, they exploit members financially, psychologically, emotionally, and all too often sexually. Check. And the last one, a very important aspect of cult is the idea that if you leave the cult, horrible things will happen to you. This is important, and it's important to realize that people outside a cult are potential members. So they're not looked upon as negatively as people inside the cult who have made the decision to leave the cult. Checkmate. So they are careful with what they put out to the general public, and because they still want to bring people into their numbers, into their flock. And if you are part of that membership and you leave, all of a sudden you're shunned, and they do everything they can to take all credibility away from you. And so you don't take the waters for anybody else. There's a lot of consistencies here. So it's just amazing. This is 2023, and everything I just read to you, all those 6 points, is things I have seen absolutely true at most of the communities who I have been part of investigations into them. It's mind-blowing.
I think what is so hard that we have learned is the position that the person who's trying to flee for safety is put in. Not only are they in a dangerous situation, but they are in a separate dangerous situation that they are about to be cut off from everything that they have and their entire support group, which is what's very important here in the domestic violence shelter area. That, Elizabeth shared how eventually she got moved to the home of an Amish family, because think of the disconnect. You come from this world, you live a certain way, and then you pull this family and these children from this dangerous situation. You need to have a safe house that also supports, to a degree, Amish sensibilities or cultures, so the transition period, which is very frightening and difficult, has things that are culturally supportive for the victims and the survivors here. And that's what makes it so hard, because they'll go from, you don't have electricity, you don't have anything, you don't talk to strangers. All of a sudden, you're in a house with lights, a television. It's frightening. It's jarring. It's emotionally overstimulating and physically. So, these are all the things that we are learning about this closed community.
Right. And what you just described is one of the reasons, the main reasons why they end up going back. Yes. They're going back to what's comfortable to them, what they know is safe, perceive as safe, and it's just a vicious cycle. They just keep going halfway house, rehab center, whatever you want to call it.
So now we want to talk about what we think is a very important case, a precedent-setting case. It's a tiny case that nobody's covered. Only people in the Amish community, that's why we're aware of it. And it's important because Elizabeth described all of this intimidation that she received from church leaders, the church supporters, this constant pressure to change her mind, drop the criminal case. So this next case we're going to talk about is also from Indiana, from Elkhart County. This is where a bold maverick of a prosecutor is fighting to protect Amish women and children who are being abused. Prosecutor Vicki Becker shocked the establishment when she did something that no one else before her has dared to do. Not only in her county, her state, after she filed these charges and she got a conviction, she got calls from around the country from other prosecutors saying, how were you able to do this? It seems simple, but it's not something that's used. What she did was she filed intimidation charges, criminal charges, misdemeanor charges against 3 Amish bishops. The prosecutor put the 3 bishops on trial last year in May of 2022. The 3 of them were convicted. Okay? Do you know how important that is? What she basically said to the community, right? A shot across the bow. She said, you cannot, in the name of God or anything else, try and intimidate a witness in a criminal case who's being abused, who is a victim, to change and drop restraining orders and all these other things just because you think the woman should stay married.
Yeah, she did something that we haven't seen in 0 other cases. You're absolutely correct. She's the first one to do this nationally. And, it's not just a message to the community, but a message to law enforcement that we can do this. You can fight this and prosecute these charges for intimidation and be successful in it. You don't have to follow the norm, because this is the way we've always treated it. Send them back to the community so that the Amish can deal with their own. And that's just not even a feasible solution, yet it happens. She is a trendsetter, a hero, because she's changing lives.
I agree with you. Yeah. And, we asked her to come on this program, and she said that she couldn't because the case is being appealed. Right. When the conviction originally happened, I did have a phone conversation with Prosecutor Becker just to understand the case a little bit. She was very kind to give me some time, but we have not been able to speak in months because once the appeals were filed, she is prohibited from speaking. And, she wants to protect the integrity of her conviction and her case, because it really is that important. Here's why it's important, and we're going to get into the details of it. Remember how, there were some real change in justice and criminal justice when people started getting prosecuted for for not reporting the sexual abuse of children as mandatory reporters. You know, until prosecutors and police started going after church leaders, teachers, that mandatory reporters, we didn't really change the culture. So what ended up happening in the Amish community, Louis, and we've seen this, some bold prosecutors and police departments around the country, not a lot of them, but some of them in Amish communities, started charging the bishops with not reporting the sexual abuse that they became aware of because they're mandatory reporters. So once the bishops started getting charged, it changed things. It forced the bishops to start reporting and working with police. Otherwise, it's to their own detriment. They're going to get charged. They could get convicted. So that changed things. And that's what Prosecutor Becker's doing here on the intimidation issue.
Right.
She gets a conviction, then maybe she can force them to think twice. What are you going to do? Will it have a chilling effect? And that's the whole point, right?
Right. And I think it is having an effect, at least from while that was going on. I mean, the 6 month, we were following the 3 bishops, and we talked about that almost on a weekly basis. Stay in touch. We're watching the 3 bishops, this case, as it go through its progression, because other people within Amish communities were also watching it, right? They were watching to see how that was going to end up, to see if that would give them a bigger platform to move forward, and the challenge of bishops and the deacons within their community whenever they get intimidated, when they were to threaten them with shunning, right? Drop the restraining order, drop the criminal charges, right? Or we're going to shun you. I mean, those are all, we see that actually, I want to say 99% of the cases we've investigated within these Amish communities, that's the norm. It's not the exception. There always some type of threat in there from upper management, from the leadership in these communities. And where else can that happen, right? Where you're not committing a crime. Well, I know what happens in all these Amish communities, basically. Yeah.
They just do whatever they want. I mean, that's how they live. And the problem is, because when you bring religion into the conversation, it almost paralyzes the police and prosecutors, because once you bring a freedom of religion into the conversation, that stops a lot of things. It makes it so complicated. And we're going to get into this case, how everything was done in the name of God. And the judge is like, you know what? This is not about God. This is not about God. And that's why this case is so important and complicated. So according to court records, in June of 2020, 3 bishops went to the home of Elizabeth Wingard. Elizabeth and her children were living under the protection of a restraining order which prohibited her abusive husband, Jonas, from coming near them. The order was in place from May of 2017 through December of 2022. According to court records, Elizabeth suffered at the hands of her abusive husband for years from domestic violence. This is all from the court record. According to the affidavit to show probable cause, Bishops Freeman Hochsteller, Joe Hochsteller, and Willard Yoder went to Elizabeth's house and told her that if she didn't drop the restraining order and take back her husband, they would ban her, Elizabeth, from the church. She pleaded with them. She said she has to keep her children safe, because if she drops the restraining order, the county will take her children away, because then she will be seen as endangering the lives of her children. So she's explaining to them why she cannot take back her abusive husband. Elizabeth told them no, and that's when they got really nasty. And according to everything that happened in the trial, Louis, they didn't deny it.
No, they thought it was fine. They say, "Yep, that's exactly what we did." So they were still condoning what they did through the jury process or trial process. So,
unbelievable.
To this day, they'll deny it forever, I'm sure. They're not going to their ways.
Just incredible. So according to the affidavit, a few months later, this is after the visit from the 3 bishops, the church released a defamatory letter which declared Elizabeth was banned or shunned from the church for her, quote, insubordination, refusing to let an abusive man back in the home, that she, quote, brought this upon herself. Just like with Elizabeth Hilty, it's her fault. It's her fault. The bishop said it was all her fault for not forgiving her husband, Jonas, for abusing her and the children.
Yeah. Victim blaming at its worst. So, yeah. And that letter, I think, ended up being used as evidence against them in court. So,
Yes.
as it should be.
As it should be. But they didn't have a problem with it because they kept explaining. The bishops kept explaining to the judge,
Right.
oh, but this is God's will that this marriage be held together. A man and woman must be together. Oh, completely missing the whole part about, endangering lives. So, okay, the police then questioned the men. This is the buildup to the case. And according to the police, the three bishops confessed. They said, quote, "We are trying to resolve the separation of a husband and wife." That was their focus. Not the safety of the wife, not the safety of the children, not getting Jonas the help that he needs, right?
Right. Completely backwards.
Totally backwards. And then there's another quote. I mean, the court records are fascinating on this. It said that if there is a restraining order, this is what the bishop said to the police. If there is a restraining order, then you are not in good standing. The word of God doesn't support it. Really? Where is that in the Bible?
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I watched some of this, and then we both did online. We saw this trial proceed online. And one of the things that fascinated both of us, and you hear about this, but when you see it visually, it's just a whole different impact, is how they packed that courtroom, the three bishops did, with their own Amish congregation. It was packed to the gill to support the three bishops, not the victim. Once again, to support the three bishops and to put even more intimidation on the victim. That's the purpose of that. It's
and the court and the judge, the entire system.
True. Yeah.
Right? The entire system.
Yeah.
And look, you have a freedom to support whomever you want, right? And that is the beauty and sometimes the trouble with our system. You can go and support whomever, but man, it's just, with something like this, it's highly organized. It's highly organized and constant pressure. So the bishops also said, this is again from the court records, that if Elizabeth wants to be a member in good standing, then she cannot have a restraining order. Who are these three bishops to declare this?
Yeah. Well,
they are so out of touch.
Yeah, so out of touch, and they're the leaders, right? And that's the belief they're putting out there, and we call them bullies in other societies. They're bullying their way to get what they want. It's probably worse than that, but they absolutely believe in what they're saying. They drop the restraining order. That's just another tool to try to get someone to drop the restraining order under pressure, which is completely illegal.
Yes. So the three of them were charged, and they went on trial. The three used their religion as their defense. They admitted that they wanted the restraining order gone and they wanted Jonas back in the house. They admitted that they banned Elizabeth for not complying with their demands. I mean, they admitted it. They didn't deny any of this. This is what's just amazing. So when the judge finally wrote his decision, based on the facts that he had heard and the statements that were made in court, the judge's words are very powerful. The judge wrote, quote, "Elizabeth was exposed to hatred, contempt, disgrace, and ridicule. She was ostracized from her church community, which resulted in social isolation. The children were banned from Amish schools, and she was banned from shopping at Amish businesses." That is the price she paid for protecting her children.
Yeah, hit her where it hurts, right? Everywhere. Yeah, to flip her life upside down. It's frustrating, but back to, even more light on, is this the behavior of a cult?
Well, one of the things, and again, we did hear from Elizabeth Hilty, who said she had the most beautiful upbringing, the most beautiful family and childhood memories in a very safe community. And so I think what's important to remind people is that the way the Amish churches work or communities is they're individual. They have districts, I think is the way they're called, and they have leaders within that. And depending on who the leader is, dictates a lot on how that church operates. And if one is too conservative or one is maybe too progressive, people find not all operate like this, which again is very important to say, because I think the majority of the Amish churches, they are good people.
There's a lot of good people in there.
There are a lot of good people, and I just want to be clear about that. But there's a lot of problem within the community, and sadly, the good churches aren't really able to help and kind of mold the ones that have these problems, which, I mean, these are public safety issues.
Elizabeth's perception of her wonderful upbringing in the Amish community and her positive thoughts on that, I agree with that, but that's all they allowed her to see as a child. Now that she's gone out to educated herself, she has a whole different version of that. Wonderful memories, but I don't know. I do know that most of the communities that I've looked into have this cultish behavior. May not be hers, may not, but I feel very confident saying that. And that's something that, I just think really needs to resonate, not just with communities, but a lot of the justice system. There's something going on here where their minds are being tweaked in a way. Groups are made to do things that other groups just wouldn't normally do in supporting a suspect, protecting the religion first, and not supporting the victim because of religious exemption. It's just.
It's not fair. It's not fair. It's not fair under this.
There's something criminal here.
Yeah,
truly criminal.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the judge also wrote that, quote, the defendants had no regard for the safety of the children or of her. And really, that's it. That's the whole point. That these church leaders, right, didn't care about her safety, the children's safety. It was just about keeping this marriage together.
Right.
Everything's lost on them. They're, what's important to them, it's incredible. So one of the bishops actually said in court that he didn't believe that Elizabeth Wingard was a victim of domestic violence.
Yeah. You're never going to convince him. You have to educate the rest and the kids growing up and the youth in those communities. You will never change that man's mind.
No, because I don't think the conviction has changed their minds at all. It might change maybe someone else, to think more thoughtfully before trying to intimidate. Maybe we don't. That's what we're hoping. We're hoping if this stands, that it gives other prosecutors the idea to go forward with this and start charging these cases, to start, enforcing the law. This is the law, the rule of law in this country. You don't get your own separate justice system because you're Amish, even though they are in effect doing that. So the judge said that the defendants, quote, showed no understanding of the trauma that she had suffered through many years and continue to suffer on through the date of this offense. That's right. They had no regard for her. So the judge found them guilty of intimidation, a Class A misdemeanor, on June 6th of 2022. They were sentenced in August. They were each given a year of jail time, which was suspended, plus 1 year of probation and a very strict order to have no contact with the victim and her children in this case. As far as we know, Elizabeth Wingard remains banned and shunned from her community and continues to be victimized for being a victim. The case is on appeal.
Yeah.
What do you make of this, Louis?
Of course, it's on appeal. Who's paying for that? They have nothing to lose. So Elizabeth is still in the community. So every time she's getting probably harassed, intimidated on a daily basis, all those are crimes. You need to cut it at the court at the beginning. They started that. So I'm hoping they finish what they started, and the justice system is consistent with the theme that witness intimidation is not acceptable. Shunning is a huge tool, and I bet to some level of degree they're still trying to get her to write a letter of recantation or something that, no, that's not quite what happened, to put it more the blame on herself than the suspect and the three bishops in this case.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to happen until the justice system starts being consistent with handling these cases like they handle every other case of domestic violence, child abuse, rape outside of these Amish communities. And we just haven't seen consistency there, Anna. Just not consistent. And that's what needs to happen.
Yeah. And that's why I applaud Prosecutor Becker on this case, because she's really trying to fight the good fight. And she's the one who has these women come in to her office to talk to her and her prosecutors about these cases. And so many of them can't go forward because they're scared, they're being intimidated. This is the world that she lives in. So I hope that this case has a chilling effect. I hope it is part of the change that we need to see, because what we discuss all the time on this podcast is, what is justice? How should it look? We know that communities determine a lot of what happens within a criminal case, but this is just not okay. It's just not okay. Louis, I want to thank you for this great conversation today and this journey that we've been on, that we're not done with. I just want to share one little story when Louis and I were in Indiana. So, Louis, you 2 years ago, one of the things that you realized was missing was you needed to get the word out about how to get help, like if for children, for women. So you worked on a poster, that could be either tacked on somewhere or emailed. And I know it's like some Amish have email, some don't. And it was important that this poster be written in Pennsylvania Dutch and in English, because some of them don't speak English. And so you and I, we tried to give out some of these flyers in an Amish community. It didn't go over so well.
No.
We tried.
We tried. It's step one in a long process, but yeah, we tried to hand it to families coming off with literally buggies riding through town, right? And try to have a discussion, but at least there's a phone number there. It's step one. And, that thought process of trying to educate the Amish and the children within those communities, all they have to do is have the number and ability to call, which is another hurdle. But I think that's a big thing that didn't exist before we got involved 2 years ago. So it's a big step.
It is. So, we've seen a lot of improvement. We've seen several families who have left, who have gotten convictions. That to me is the most gratifying part. Whether you live your life how you choose. But if you as a survivor are able to get justice and get your attacker and your abuser convicted, that's what I'm all about.
Yeah. And we're going to put that hotline up again.
Yes, we are.
Right. Report Amish child abuse, 833-44-CHILD. It's been up and running for 2.5 years, and it's going to stay up as far as I'm concerned, as long as we can make that happen.
Absolutely. Well, Louis, as always, it's been a pleasure. Life with you is always interesting.
Never boring, huh? Yeah.
No. So, Louis, where can people find you, follow you on social media, reach out to you if the Amish are listening?
Well, I know they're listening, right?
I know, yeah.
Yeah, they're absolutely listening. My entire social media footprint is at getbitinvestigations.com.
Excellent. You can find me at Anna G News. You can get this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can see our original podcasts, our episodes on the Amish cases that led to this, if you really want a full picture of what's going on. And of course, you can subscribe to our newsletter through truecrimedaily.com. Until next week, I'm your host, Ana Garcia. This has been a special episode of True Crime Daily, the podcast. And as we always say, whether Amish or not, don't do crime.